Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're actually going to skip our usual agenda because I want to dive immediately into a truly profound and honestly incredibly moving exploration of two beautifully parallel stories. On one side, we have The Weight of Unnamed Birds, and on the other, Catalogue of Exits. Together, they give us this fascinating look at trauma, bureaucracy, and healing. We're going to look at two people who are completely unaware of each other, yet they're navigating the exact same internal architecture of survival. It's really something else.
I want to start strong with this evocative quote straight from the text. The forms cannot contain what they're about. I really want you to think about that for a second. Think about the invisible burdens we all carry around, right? The stuff that simply cannot be categorized by checking a tiny box or filling out a line on a piece of paper. How do we document the completely untranslatable moments of our lives? Let that sit with you. Keep that question right in the back of your mind as we introduce our two subjects.
Okay, let's dive into this. First up, we have Martin. He's a former doctor living in post-World War II Berlin. He's completely numb, quietly tracking this intense internal ledger of discrepancies and guilt. And then we have Soo-Ha. She works in an office managing total bureaucratic purgatory. Specifically, this endless loop of unresolved forms called VS-14B. So what do they have in common? Well, both of these individuals are completely stuck. They're suspended in what the text beautifully calls intermediate spaces.
All right, Section 1, the weight of unresolved burdens, or being trapped in intermediate spaces. So, both Martin and Soo-Ha are existing in this state of indefinite waiting. Have you ever felt like time isn't flowing like a normal river, but instead it feels more like a giant empty field you're just standing in, watching the weather arrive and depart with total indifference? Well, that is exactly where our subjects are. For Martin, this intermediate space is haunted by a recurring dream. In it, he's searching a dark forest for invisible birds. Birds he can clearly hear but cannot see. He searches and searches without covering any actual distance. This is deeply tied to a traumatic choice he made back in the war. He made a strictly correct medical decision based on incredibly scarce resources, and because of it, a man died. He's trapped, holding on to a right decision that yielded an absolutely devastating result. And this brilliantly illustrates how Soo-Ha copes with her own bureaucratic world. She deals with a totally different kind of suspension. She manages folks like this one man who has been filing the exact same completely unnecessary form for 9 years. Literally 9 years. Why? Simply because no one ever told him he could stop. He's trapped in a loop, making decisions by default, waiting for a resolution that the system is literally incapable of providing.
Moving right along into our second act, translating the untranslatable and the search for the right words.
Martin, who is totally lost in his numbness, ends up meeting a translator named Vera in a cafe. Vera is working on translating a finished novel, and just through conversation, she inadvertently provides Martin with a brand new philosophical framework for understanding his trauma. She perfectly captures the limitations of language they both face. She says, a sentence is already an explanation, but a word is a recognition. See, Martin lacks the basic vocabulary for his surviving trauma. The words for doing the right thing with a terrible outcome just don't exist. And similarly, Soo-Ha deals with forums that only understand their own rigid, predefined categories. Both of them are facing systems that just totally fail to capture human reality.
So the crucial point here is Vera's concept of the footnote. When a translator cannot find an exact word, they pick the closest one available and use a footnote to carry the honest remainder. This is a real game changer for Martin. He realizes that his numb, weathered steadiness, his daily routine of just getting up and making his bed, isn't damage. It isn't a failure to feel at all. It's actually his own personal footnote to an impossible, untranslatable experience.
Let's shift our focus back to Soo-Ha's office for Section 3, reading the whole file and the bureaucracy of memory.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Soo-Ha's young colleague, Dresser, has just done something totally unprecedented. He actually sat down and read an entire decades-long file. He realizes that a bureaucratic file, unlike our human memory, doesn't edit things out. It shows the exact chronological shifts in addresses, contacts, and names. Reading a whole file reveals a person surviving and adapting to all these different conditions over time. And this triggers a huge realization for Soo-Ha. Her sister Yuna, who calls her every single week, is essentially reading her file in real time, and she's doing it with love, not surveillance.
That brings us to Section 4, the third thing, and encountering parallel versions of ourselves.
Armed with this fresh understanding of footnotes, Martin finally boards a train to Hamburg to visit his brother Heinrich. He's been putting this off, right? He's terrified he's going to have to play the role of the pre-war son and brother. But Heinrich offers him immense grace. He doesn't expect Martin to be his pre-war self at all. Instead, they experience what Vera's finished novel calls the third thing. It's what happens when the remembered version of a person and the continued changed version of a person finally meet. They create a third thing that isn't the past, but isn't completely new either. It's a revised, honest connection built on exactly who they are right now. During this visit, Heinrich actually reveals their mother's last words about Martin before she passed away. When she was told Martin was traveling and couldn't be reached, she just said, "That's like him." Martin has to accept that he is never, ever going to know the exact intonation of those words. Was it said with tender love, resigned disappointment, maybe a mix of both? He literally can't know. It's just another unresolved footnote he has to carry. And the beautiful thing is, he finally accepts that. Which brings us to our climax, Section 5, the act of proceeding, and awakenings in October.
Both Martin and Soo-Ha, separated by distance, circumstance, and text, completely unaware of each other, experience a quiet, parallel breakthrough in this very month of October. The air changes, the light shifts, and something inside both of them finally just clicks. For Soo-Ha, this awakening happens with a plant on her desk that she's neglected for 11 years. She finally buys a larger terracotta pot and repots it. And when she does, the plant actually looks smaller in the bigger pot. But she writes this amazing line in her notebook: "Things look smaller in larger contexts. This is not shrinkage, this is room." It is such a beautiful metaphor. She is finally granting herself the permission to grow, to change, and to take up more space in her own life.
Let's move to Martin and see how this builds. In that very same October, his haunting, recurring dream finally changes. He writes in his notebook, "The birds have bodies. I don't know what kind. It doesn't matter what kind." The invisible ghosts in his mind's forest have finally materialized. His internal searching has found a kind of peace. Now the trauma hasn't magically vanished, but the deep anxiety of the search has settled. And this brings us back to that Finnish word Vera was trying to translate earlier, sisu. Sisu isn't some magical, triumphant fix. It is the quiet, powerful act of proceeding in the complete absence of encouragement or reward. For both Martin and Soo-Ha, simply proceeding is the resolution. Just continuing to move forward is the victory.
To bring these incredible narrative arcs together, we see liberation in these very small acts. Back in the office, the man who was filing forms for 9 years learns his father's estate was actually cleared 3 years ago. He's finally freed. Soo-Ha notes that sometimes the footnote is simply, "You can go." Meanwhile, Martin steps out into the crisp Berlin autumn streets. He isn't completely healed, but he's present. He's witnessed by Vera, and he's moving forward. So, what does this all mean for us? It leaves us with this final provocative thought. As you move through the intermediate spaces of your own life, the waiting, the unresolvable problems, the things that language and forms just can't quite capture, how are you authoring your own footnote? I really hope this explainer gave you some room to think about the invisible birds you might be carrying and the immense power of simply proceeding. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you on the next explainer.